behalf of Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce, we welcome you all for this unique session on recent changes in food packaging and labeling regulation. The session is organized under the aegis of Agro and Food Processing Expert Committee of the Chamber. The committee is chaired by Mr. Ankur Bhaumik, who is the COO of MTR Foods, co-chaired by Mr. Narasimha Nakshatri, who is the Agri and Horti Consultant, Nakshatri Associates, and Mr. Prakash, who is the Technical Director, Center for Holistic Agriculture and Green Enterprise. On behalf of the Chamber, we acknowledge our sincere thanks to Dr. Rajesh Mache, Head Packaging, CFTRI, and Ms. Shubhaprada Nissala, Director in Charge, ITC EPSAN. Thank you very much, the distinguished speakers, for accepting our invitation to address the members over this exclusive session. The Chamber also acknowledges our member organizations who are the annual sponsors of the events. The organizations like Mrs. Bueller, Fundromax, Sona Group, MTR Foods, and Wipro. I request you to join for the Karnataka Nadagite. Please do stay with us.
जय भारत जननीय तनुजाते जय हे कर्नाटक माते जय सुंदर नदी वनगण नाडे जय हे रसरुचिगणे भूदेविय मकुटद नवमणिये अंदद चंदद ಹೊನ್ನಿನ ಮಣಿ ರಾಘವ ಮಧುಸೂದನ ರವತರಿಸಿದ ಭಾರತ ಜನನಿಯ ತನುಜಾತೆ ಜಯ ಭಾರತ ಜನನಿಯ ತನುಜಾತೆ ಜನನೀಯ ಜೋಗುಳ ವೇಗದ ಘೋಷ ಜನನಿಗೆ ಜೀವವು ನಿನ್ನಾವೇಶ ಹಸುವಿನ ಗಿರಿಗಳ ಸಾರೆ ನಿನ್ನಯ ಕೊರಳಿನ ಮಾರೆ ಕಪಿಲ ಪತಂಗಲ ಗೌತಮ ಚಿರನುತ ಭಾರತ ಜನನಿಯ ತನುಜಾತೆ ಜಯ ಹೇ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಮಾತೆ ಶಂಕರ ರಮನುಜ ವಿದ್ಯಾರಣ್ಯ ಅಸಲೇಶ್ವರ ವಿದ್ಯಾರಣ್ಯ षडक्षरि पुन्ना अम्बल कुविपति जन्ना कवि गरुडितिर मंगल धाम कवि कोकिलगण पुण्य राम नायक रामानंद कबीरर भारत जननीय तनुजाते जय हे कर्नाटक माते भैरव वैसळ राಳಿದ ನಾಡೆ ಕನ್ನಡ ಜಗಣರ ನೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಬೀಡೆ ಶರಾವತಿ ಕುಂಡ ಕಾವೇರಿಯವರ ರಂಗ ಚೈತನ್ಯ ಪರಮಹಂಸ ವಿವೇಕರ ಭಾರತ ಜನನಿಯ ತನುಜಾತೆ ಜಯ ಹೇ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಮಾತೆ ಸರ್ವ ಜನಾಂಗದ ಶಾಂತಿಯ ತೋಟ ರಸಿಕರ ಕಂಗಳ ಸೆಳೆಯುವ ನೋಟ ಹಿಂದೂ ಕ್ರೈಸ್ತ ಮುಸಲ್ಮಾನ ಭಾರತಿಕ ಜೈನ ಉದ್ಯಾನ ಜನ ಹೋಲುವ ದೊರೆಗಳ ಧಾಮ ನಾಯಕ ವೈದಿಕರ ರಾಮ ಕನ್ನಡ ನುಡಿ ಕುಡಿದಾಡುವ ದೇಹ ಕನ್ನಡ ತಾಯಿಯ ಮಕ್ಕಳ ದೇಹ ಭಾರತ ಜನನಿಯ ತನುಜಾತೆ ಜಯ ಹೇ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಮಾತೆ ಜಯ ಹೇ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಮಾತೆ ಜಯ ಹೇ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಮಾತೆ.
Thank you very much. And now I request Mr. Ankur Bhaumik, who is the chairman of the Agro and Food Processing Expert Committee, to welcome and set the context. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rupa, and good evening to all of you, to distinguished speakers, Dr. Mache, Dr. Rajesh Mache, and Ms. Shubhaprada Nissala, all the participants, committee members, and secretariat. Today, we have very important webinar on the topic recent changes in packaging and labeling. Before we get to this, I think what we need to really understand why we are doing that. Today, there is a greater importance and awareness with consumers on health and environment. And therefore, And consumers have every right to know today what they're eating, whether they're eating something healthy, and the way we package it and deliver the product to them, whether it is sustainable. And therefore, the government authorities, whether it's the FSSSI or legal metrology, they're really working on this to make packaging, to make the packets when it is delivered to consumers to be more consumer friendly. And when I'm talking about consumer friendly, it is in terms of font size so that consumers can easily read. It is in terms of kind of information that they must know, because there could be a diabetic patient, there could be different kinds of patients. So they need to know what kind of nutrition information that is there. And therefore, which will have to be more comprehensive and exhaustive. I'm sure both of them will talk about this. So basically, there are certain changes which are already in place, and also there are certain there are certain changes suggested in a draft stage, and one definitely on HFSS, which is a traffic signal code for high fat sugar and salt. I don't know whether we are going to talk about this or we're going to talk about only changes. There is one more change which is also under discussion, which is on logo for dairy products, because today we never talked about. There are a lot of allergen materials that is being used. How consumers should know what kind of allergens being used. Now, this kind of a declaration is required. What is important for us to know? End of the day, we sell products for consumers, and consumers are changing. Their requirement is changing. They are more aware, and rightly so. And if their health needs, if they have, and they want to buy some products, it is our responsibility to see how can we implement whatever changes suggested are being enforced by authorities. So this webinar, I'm sure, will immensely help to all of us who always would like to be compliant, but sometimes there are some, many companies, they will have their internal regulatory team, and they will do the detailing, and they will look at the fine print to see that they are more compliant. There are some medium or small sectors, sometimes it's not that they don't want to be compliant, but sometimes that information is not readily available to them. I think this is a kind of webinar where information dissemination would happen, where everyone, probably not from the corporate side, not from the selling side, but also at a consumer side, we are definitely going to learn a lot. So happy learning. So over to Rupa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. May I now request Mr. R. Prakash, who is the co-chair of the Agro and Food Processing Expert Committee, to introduce the speakers. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Rankur, for setting the context. Though simple, I think that is what we intend to do. I mean, keep these webinars simple, understandable. First of all, I thank Ms. Shubha, Nistala, and also Dr. Mashe for having agreed to come over and talk to us on these important topics on this webinar. Thank you very much. I think there was no hesitation in agreeing. Thank you. And both of you I consider as very special speakers. Reason is, you're both of you, have some commonalities in the sense, Mashe, he works in R&D sector, but very much involved with academics, industry, very much works with all the different sectors. Plus, he's also closely associated with the AFSTI. So this makes the person more complete. Similarly, I think Shubha also, she has industry experience, audit experience, training, academics, regulatory body, which makes very good, very good. And then you will really understand or know the pain points of the different people. It could be consumers, could be industry, could be anybody, and then explain us. Now what I'll do is, I think I'll just not read the entire profile, but very briefly touch on some of the important points of the speakers. Dr. Mashi will be speaking first, so I'll briefly read his profile. Later on, I think I'll cover Shubha's profile. Dr. Mashi Rajeshwar S. Mache, he is the Chief Scientist and Head Food Packaging Technology at CFD Mysore. And then, his major domain is in food science and packaging technology, has created unique solutions for food and packaging industry. He has technical background in engineering, research experience in food packaging, close interface with industry. He's come out with many innovations in terms of packaging, and he's also a person who has guided about 75 postgraduate students, and then involved in designing curriculum to develop future pipeline of scientific talent and guiding the students. And he's also on the editorial board of several journals. He has many other things, he has written books, he has written chapters. He is very much associated with the AFSTI, the FSSI, all of this. And he is an alumnus from the premier IIT Delhi. So I think I'll stop at this, request Dr. Mache to make his presentation, while I'll brief the profile of Shubha later when she speaks. Yes, over to you, Mache.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash, for a nice introduction, and a very good afternoon to all of you, Mr. Ankur, Narasimha, and Shubha. And I thank the Chamber for inviting me to interact with you this afternoon. Interestingly, there are two areas when you are talking of packaging. One is packaging regulations from the safety point of view, or the consumer safety point of view, and another one is the labeling point of view, where the communication to the consumer. I leave the labeling part to Shubha, my good friend, and I will try to cover the aspect of the regulatory aspect of the food safety. If it's okay, I'll start sharing my slides.
You can go ahead, not much.
Yeah. Can you see the screen? Can you see my presentation?
Yeah.
I'll make
Yes,
it.
sir.
I'll make it full screen. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we have another 25 minutes to interact. So when you are talking of food packaging, I'm talking from the point of view of the regulatory aspect. And then, as you know, the topic is important changes in the food packaging and labeling regulations. As you know, all the regulations, either it is BIS regulations or FSSI regulations, they are not a static regulations. And the good part is today, what regulations you have, tomorrow there will be changes. And it is happening when, as we are talking, there are a lot of things are happening in the different committees of BIS as well as FSSI. So I'll put maybe some of them in a perspective. So when you're talking, just to start with, really, if you look at the food, how you define the food, it is a commodity that can be ingested, digested, and assimilated by our human body. That is a basic, simple definition. But when you come to knowing and understanding what is food packaging, it is, I'm just giving the pure definition of FSSI. Food packaging is the science, art, and technology of enclosing or protecting food products for distribution, storage, sale, and use. And also it plays an important role as a silent salesman, and industry knows it better than anybody else. Now, when you're talking of labeling part, any written, printed, or graphic matter which is displayed on the food or near food, and also it is very mandatory that every packet should carry the labels. I'm not going in details on the labeling part. Now, earlier to 2006, there were a lot of different regulations in terms of Essential Commodity Act or meat food product order and edible oil packaging order. All this controlled by different agencies and different ministries. And there is a lot of inconvenience to the industry as well as to the consumer. So there was a lot of thinking in terms of one nation, it should be one law, and then hence the FSSI regulation came in, and then that is where all these things are brought together in 2006. Now, when you're talking of the regulations, in FSSI, there are different regulations. Basically, we will talk about the packaging and labeling regulations. To start with, earlier there was only one regulation, but recently they have divided these regulations into two parts. One is Food Safety Standards, Packaging Regulations 2018, and then Food Safety Standards, Labeling and Display Regulations. One is in terms of the safety of the consumer, another one is the display for the communication. So, when you're talking of the general requirement in terms of the food, I'll just run maybe a couple of minutes in terms of the basic requirements that every food business operator shall ensure that the packaging material used shall be according to the regulations of 2018. And importantly, material which comes in direct contact with the food should be food grade. Now, what is mean by food grade? There are a lot of gray areas, some of the from the regulation point of view and from the industry as well as from the consumer's point of view. Maybe we'll spend a little more time on understanding and how this whole area is dynamic and how it is changing on the regular basis. Then the packaging material also shall be suitable for the type of food.
Yeah, but you must be having some pattern or some trend that's ongoing.
Yes, there is something. And interestingly, the packaging material should withstand different mechanical, chemical, and thermal stresses. These are basic general requirement of the packaging. Now, apart from this, the package should be clean, hygienic, and tamper-proof, very importantly, and sealing material shall be compatible with the product. What is meant by compatibility is very, very important. Now, some of the plastic containers, which has a capacity more than 5 liters, including glass bottles, mostly they are reused. Once, if they are reused, they should be durable and easy to clean and disinfect. This is very, very important regulations. If it is not there, then you will not be able to use that particular material. Now, tin containers, once used, should not be and shall not be reused for any food application. Interestingly, when you are talking of printing inks, it should conform to the Bureau of Indian Standards number 15495. Now, another important thing from the printed surface of the packaging should not come in contact directly with food. Now, if you look at the whole gamut of printing ink, globally, this is also very less regulated and there are a lot of issues in terms of the hazards. So, but as I told, the things are evolving and there are regulations are coming, particularly European Union is coming out with a very standard regulations in terms of the printed surfaces in terms of the food application. Of course, you may be knowing before on the roadside, newspapers were used for serving the food, but the type of chemicals used for newspaper printing has a lot of issues, particularly in terms of the carcinogenicity or otherwise. So hence, earlier their notification came and now it has been put it into the regulation that you cannot use. But in spite of that, you will see some of the places this newspaper is also used for the maybe storing or even for the serving the food. Now, printed surfaces of the packaging material shall not come in direct contact with the food products. And now, coming to the very important regulation. Now, every food business operator shall obtain the certificate of conformity issued by the NABL accredited lab for the packaging material which is coming in direct contact with the food. Now, what it means, we will maybe spend a little more time because they understand this is a very, very gray area and a lot of, particularly the consumer and some of the industries also are not aware what is meant by that certification and what sort of a certification you need to get. And also, when if it is a multi-layer film, the contact layer also needs to meet the packaging requirement given in the regulation. Now, apart from the plastic, a lot of times we just focus on the plastic, but the paper and paperboard materials, glass, metal and metal alloys, and plastic materials all has to follow the regulations defined in the standard. Now there are different materials, as I said, it can be that are mostly used as a contact material, food contact material, which all of them, including the conveyor or the equipments what you are using in the processing or packaging or direct packaging material, also has to comply with these particular regulations. Now, coming back, I'll just run through a little brief on the different regulations in the paper and paperboard. When you're talking of paper and paperboard, it is not very well regulated. There are a lot of new regulations has to come in, because if you look at it, normally if you take now newspaper is banned for using food contact application. But is that all other papers are safe for use? I don't think so, because if you look at the literature globally, that's not very encouraging one. So hence, as the use is not so much in India and it is not totally regulated, so hence there are regulations in pipeline in India as well. There is a lot of thought processes going on, but that also will be regulated. But at present, whatever is picked is in terms of the uniform formation, thickness and substances, or free from the visible marks or cuts or pinholes. That are small things which are very, very generic in nature, but not from the very regulatory point of view. But it says that it should be food grade and shall be free from contaminants. Now, when you're talking of any paper coming in contact with the food, it has to conform to either one of the standards, Bureau of Indian standards. It can be for grease proof or vegetable parchment paper or aluminum foil, or it is general purpose packaging or wrapping materials or folding boxes, and also corrugated fiberboard boxes. Of late, there's a lot of wax coating is done on some of these papers to make it water resistance. So it should conform to type 1, the wax, paraffin wax should conform to IS 4654. That's very, very important. Otherwise, some of the waxes, particularly some of the synthetic waxes, is having a health issue when it gets in contact with the food per se directly. So hence, even for glass, a lot of times we have a notion that glass is really very safe, but it's not so. Sometimes out of glass also you will have a lot of heavy metals leaching out on the food, and that also has to be within the limit. And then in general, it should be free from the mold marks or stones or chipping, that sort of things. And also it should have a smooth surface without pinholes or sharp edges, and free from hairline cracks. Hairline cracks sometimes allows the outside maybe moisture or gases to get in, and also it creates a problem, hazardous problem. Now, metal also is not very extensively regulated in India. There are very generic regulations in terms of what is not fit for human consumption. It can be in terms of the rustiness. If you see visible rustiness onto the product, then it is not acceptable. Or if there are animal containers which is now chipped, or there is a rustiness seen in that. And then very generic one, the copper and brass containers which are not properly tinned. So what is meant by not properly tinned also is an appropriate grade of metal and metal alloys has to be used in the storage and in packaging. Now, the metal and metal alloys are regulated by different standards, from the tin-free steel or tin containers to the aluminum containers, and then also the closures like crown cap closures, or then round open top sanitary cans also are regulated based on the specific standards. Now coming back to very important areas, because most of the food packed are packed in the plastic materials, and plastic material, the regulations are in the very, very primitive stages. Recently, we are just talking of the global migration test, and very few specific migration tests have been listed. Yesterday, only the subcommittee of the specific migration has defined this testing procedures, and it is in the wider circulation from BIS, and that will come, and once that comes, then that will also get incorporated into maybe in the FSSI regulations. Now, in general, when you are talking of the plastic packaging material, it should pass the prescribed overall migration limit of 60 ppm or 10 grams per dm square, according to the ISO 9845. What it means, I'll just make it a little more elaborative, or maybe I'll take it in the next slide. And also, when you're talking of the colorants, a lot of times the colorants is another big issue in India. Long back, I'm not trying to see anything now, but long back we have done survey on the pigments or colorants used in food contact applications, and most of them were having issues in terms of the regulations. Now I'm just reading here, the recycled plastic, including carry bags, were not used for food packaging applications, either for storage and carrying. But as we are talking today, there is another specific subcommittee on rPET, that means recycled PET materials. Now, that is also in the draft stage, where the recycled PET can be used for the food contact applications, particularly if you want to use it for juices, or maybe use it for the even mineral water. So that is going to come shortly. So hence, as I said earlier, no recycled plastic you were allowed to be used in any food contact applications. But now, yes, slowly we are getting in to that person. Now, understanding a little more, maybe Dr. Prakash, maybe 2-3 minutes before I finish my time, you can just sound me. Otherwise, being a scientist, we have a bad habit of talking more than the time given. So please take the liberty to do that. Now,
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. Coming back to in terms of the safety part of it, I'll just spend a little more time so that the industries, particularly small scale industries, will understand the safety concern. Now, a lot of people, they say that when you are talking of the food, when you are eating, is it safe to eat food in the plastic? Is it safe to drink water in the PET bottles, or maybe we get that sort of a SDP or some bottles which you are storing? Is it really safe to use any food in contact with the packaging material? Now, I'm not sure how it is. You just see what is the phenomenon, what happens when you have product. So if you have food, there is something from the packaging material is getting into the food, and from food there's something is getting into the packaging material. And in the active packaging, if you're using it, is a both way phenomenon, or there are losses of flavor or gain of flavor, gases, or maybe water, and there are a lot of hygiene material, or light is getting in, or there are mechanical stresses. All this happens with the product. So once all this is happening, what happens? Is it safe when you use? Because I'm saying that the flavor is getting in, some of gases are getting in, some of the things from plastic is getting into the food. And I'm sure what is getting in the food are not micronutrients or some sort of a minerals which are good for health. So in the waste case, it can be inert material which may not harm, but most of the time it is a chemical which may be harmful to the health. So hence we need to look at this. As I said earlier, it is not only just singling out only plastic as a villain and then all other materials are good for health. It is not necessarily. If you look at the glass materials, you will have silicates or heavy metals getting into the food. Plastics, of course, will spend a little more time on plasticizers, monomers, and anti-static materials getting into the food. Paper, of course, you have a lot of additives and then fillers we are adding into the paper that also gets in. And also, apart from that, there are some of the chemicals which are sometimes are quite harmful, and the metals in terms of aluminum, tin, and acid contents that also gets into the food. Now, as I said, we'll spend more time on plastic. Plastic, if you look at the two types of materials which are getting, it is there in the plastic. One is the plastic per se, the basic polymer. When you look at the process of polymerization, the polymerization is done taking the monomer and then polymerizing and bringing them together, and then you make a polymer. So in the basic plastic, there is a basic polymer as well as a non-polymeric material. Not necessarily when you polymerize the monomer, every monomer gets converted into polymer. Some of them will get converted into, some of them they are left as a monomer, and some of them may become octamer or polygon, maybe more than one molecule they join together. And they generally have a tendency, when food comes in contact with the packaging material, they migrate into the food. So these are non-avoidable. You cannot avoid this material because that is where the packaging material is. But you are adding some of the chemicals in terms of processing it. If you want to process it, you need to add some chemicals. Or if you want to get a particular desired property, it can be color or it can be transparency or something of that. This is called as end-use additives. You add these additives. Once you add these additives job is to give the particular packaging material particular property. But after giving that property, this chemical stays with that, and then when food comes in contact with this packaging material, that migrates into the food, and sometimes this can be harmful to the human health. So in terms of the additives or adhesives used for maybe laminates or binding of these two layers, you will have water soluble or maybe solvent based materials. They also get into the food because they are staying with the packaging material, or it can be polymerization residues. You are using some of the catalyst. These residues, they stay. It can be peroxide, or it can be organic nitrogen compound, or copper, or maybe cobalt salt. All this gets into there. Now, or these are the one they migrate into the food, or it can be oligomers. It can be dimer or tetramer or pentamer. All that comes, or it can be monomer of the materials. It can be vinyl chloride or caprolactam, or all that sort of materials will get into it. Or polymerization solvent. It can be water based, or it can be maybe alcohol, or it can be alkaline based. All this material also gets into the food when food comes in contact with the packaging material. Or it can be a processing aid for transformation in terms of processing stability, lubrication, or mechanical properties in terms of plasticizers or aging agents or anti-aging agents, ultraviolet stabilizers. So all that compounds are added into the packaging material. Then that is where the problem comes. Now coming back to the regulation. Now, is it possible to have the packaging material and nothing gets into the food? It is not possible. Now, what is it? What is the way out? Is it possible for us to not to use any packaging material in today's world? It is not possible. Then what is the via media? Via media is when you are eating the food, when the food, these chemical compounds are getting into the food, they are not going to harm the human health. That means it doesn't go beyond the safety limit of this. And that is number one. Number two, this also doesn't change the taste and the quality of the native substance. If you put some food, it should not have the whole property changed because you are using the packaging material. Hence, it's very importantly safety of human health, and also the quality of food what you are packing, it is not going to change. So to get this, the regulation is important, just to streamline the proper and safe use, and also prevent the indiscriminate misuse of this chemical compound which you are going to use into the processing line, and also guard the food hygiene and minimize the hazards, health hazards particularly. So hence the regulation is required. As I said, the basic thing is packaging material. Now sometimes if you want to get some transparency, you want to add 1% of a particular compound. So you say, no, I am not sure. 1% is a so small quantity. I may not get the transparency. I don't want to risk. So you will add instead of 1.5%. So if you want adding 50% more, that means 50% more chances are there this chemical compound will get into the food. That becomes a problem. So hence, good manufacturing practices in this is very important to say that what is absolute minimum quantity required, only that much quantity has to be added, not beyond that. So GMP is very, very important in this. Now, when you're talking of the regulation part, one is very important. Please keep this in mind. When you are talking of the safety regulation, number one, any packaging material which you are using, first certification is required. A lot of times, particularly small scale industries, they say that I have certification from NABL accredited lab for the food safety. But please keep it in mind, this is only overall migration test. That is only one component of the certification what you are giving. There are totally 4 certifications, 2 certifications and 2 self-certifications from the organization who are manufacturing or processing the packaging material. Number one, positive list. Bureau of Indian Standard has made a positive list for different types of food. Like say if you take LDP material, which is coming in contact, or if you take PP, or you take PET. Now these materials, when come in contact, the Bureau of Indian Standard, which has been adopted by the Food Authority, has given the list. So you cannot add any chemicals in the processing. As I said, I have defined what are the processing things. You cannot take any material which is not listed. If you are taking it at the first level itself, your packaging material is not food grade. So the self-certification that I am using this material as a contact packaging material, and the chemicals whatever used in terms of processing aid or end use aid or whatever it may be, I'm using is listed there, and I'm using only that. You need not have to tell how much quantity you're using. That is number one. Number two comes the good manufacturing practices. You are taking the list. Out of that, you are using the material. But good manufacturing practices says you need to use only 0.1%. And you are giving the certification telling that I need to use 0.1% and I'm using only 0.1%. I'm not exceeding the limit. So that is a self-certification of good manufacturing practices. And then comes the second one, overall migration and specific migration. Maybe if time permits, we will spend some time on specific and overall migration. But in this also, there are 2 ways to look at it: overall migration and specific migration. The Food Authority and Bureau of Indian Standard follows the consideration of actual application condition. That means what is food you are packing, what temperature you are storing, how long you are storing. That is one method. But US FDA follows the different method. I don't care where you are storing, but I'll check what is the quantity you're putting. I'll take the material, dissolve that into solvent. I'll check what is the residual content and whether that is allowed or not. So these are 2 different methods. We follow the European Union method. Now, coming back, the factors that affect the migration. That means whenever you pack the food, what is that factor it affects? These compound getting into the food. It can be in terms of the concentration of additives and type of plastic. Now this is taken care. The concentration of additives you are talking, we are saying that we are using the good manufacturing practices. You cannot exceed that particular limit. So that is taken care. Type of plastic material you are defining, whether it is PP, LDP, you are using it. Then type of food, whether you are packing the aqueous food, you are packing oily food, or maybe alcoholic food, or type of ingredient what you are using, or period of contact, how long you are packing the food, and at what temperature you are storing. Then thickness of the material, volume of the solvent, and type of exposure. Now, out of this, I have made this 3 as a different color because all other things are constant, are taken care by different aspects. But when you are doing the test, these 3 points has to be taken care in terms of the type of food. Now, when you're talking of type of food, as I said, food can be acidic in nature or non-acidic in nature. It can be, then you need to use different solvents, food simulants. It can be for non-acidic one, you take water, acidic one, 3% acidic acid. If it's oil and fat, N-heptane, alcohol, less than 10% and more than 10%, 10% ethanol and 50% ethanol. These are some of the things you need to look at. But there can be a combination. Sometimes It can have, say, if you take the butter, it is a combination of water and fat. Or if you take pickle, it is acidic as well as maybe aqueous. So you need to look at based on what is the food, whether you want to take one type of simulant or you need to take two type of simulant. That is has to be done in terms of testing. So,
Dr. Mashi, I think you will have to
yeah, I'll
slightly
wind it.
go faster, wind up.
Yeah. So based on the time or how much time you are storing, and the test procedures also will change accordingly. Okay. So, like say for instance, if you're hot boil, hot filling, and pasteurized less than 66, you will have different conditions. More than 66 degrees centigrade, there are different conditions. I'm not going in details, but these are the limits you need to look at it. Similarly, for colors also, you need to look at here. Interestingly, color purity of the color what you are using and the content of the heavy metals in the color has to be checked, not on the final product. So this is where you need to keep it in mind. So if you are looking at the lid, it should be less than 0.01 purity, better than that. So you need to look at it. So when you are talking of this, as I said, only see what do you mean by total amount. What you are doing is you are taking the food, packing the package simulant, and using the packaging material, and how much of quantity of this chemical is coming into the food. That is gives you a global migration. That is 60 ppm. What is defined, but that may not be enough because sometimes small quantity, say for instance, vinyl chloride monomer, if it is in parts per billion also is very carcinogenic in nature. So hence the specific migration is also required. In specific migration, the limits of heavy metals are also defined. So it has to, now earlier we have 5 metals, now added 7, it will become now 8 and 9. So it is going on adding the newer standards. That is where you need to look at it. So what I'm going to do is I'll just sum it up. The last point is I was told that what is that CFD Icon offer, what is services you can offer to this industry. One is, yes, we do a global migration test, we do specific migration test. This is according to not only FSSI, BIS, but also we do it according to European Union and US FDA. We also give a technical services on the design of package. Today, I'm sure if you look at the small scale industries, most of their labelings have big issues in terms of the font size. President was telling just in his introductory remark, the font size is not followed. Whatever FSSI tells, you are not following the font size. Or in terms of the nutritional labeling, all that is there. Shubha will cover that. But that services also we give. And we also do MSI studies and shelf-life prediction, accelerated normal shelf-life studies. If your product, which has a 2-year shelf-life, we will, with the MSI studies, we will be able to give the prediction with the scientific tools with less than 2 months. And also we do a validation of retort and all that sort of things. And also we do a consultancy, collaborative and sponsored projects. I think I will stop here with a note from the Steve Jobs, stating that the packaging can be a theater and it can create the story. So that's very, very important. And in India, as an entrepreneur, we pay very less attention to packaging. If you look at the developed countries, majority attention is given to packaging. If you want to succeed and succeed in big way, please pay more attention to packaging. And I thank the chamber and Prakash and the team and my director for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mashi. I think the subject like packaging, though it sounds simple and all that, we can have a full day seminar actually. It's so extensive. Both packaging labeling can be a 2-day seminar kind of thing. Sorry that we are able to, we are crunching it into a half-an-hour session. Thank you very much. I think you have given us a lot of technical details, plus also generic information for the industry members. Thank you. If there are any questions, I think we'll take it later after Shubha's presentation. I'm sure you will be available, isn't it?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Now we'll go to the next speaker. She's Shubha Pradhanistala. She's, as I said earlier, I think she's also special, has different kinds of experiences industry, audit, training, academics, regulatory body, all this. Has over 25 years of experience. Has worked with organizations like Coca-Cola India and Al-Kabir Exports. She has worked as a lead auditor to quality, food safety and environmental management, has done over 200 audits, also a lead tutor, and has led over 500 delegates. She has several national and international publications to her name, and also on editorial board of Indian Food Packer magazine. She is also a visiting faculty to several food technology institutes and is also on the board of studies for Symbiosis Institute of Health Sciences and Microbiology, Bhavan's College. She is also the current president of the Association of Food Scientists Mumbai chapter, presently holding the charge of director in charge of the ITC FSCAN, which is a training center jointly set up by the FSSAI and EIC. She has been conferred with numerous awards, including the FSSAI AFST Food Safety Professional of the Year 2019. So has vast experience, but the time that we have is limited, half an hour. So I request Ms. Shubha to make a presentation, please.
Thank you very much, sir, for the very warm and detailed introduction. I will just share my presentation. Always difficult to go after Mache, sir, but I shall attempt to do justice. So the topic that I will be speaking on today is the labeling and display regulation, and I fully understand that there are a lot of expected changes around the front of pack labeling. However, my focus for today will be on what is already in the regulation. Any other questions we can take up during the Q&A, but given the short time, focus is on the current regulation. Here again, all right. So quick, before I get into it, a quick look on what is ITC FSCAN. We are a training center which is set up jointly by FSSAI and the Ministry of Health and the Export Inspection Council, Ministry of Commerce, with funding from the Global Food Safety Partnership Initiative of the World Bank. We're about 2 years old now, 2.5 years old, set up in September 2019. We are housed in the EIA Mumbai building in Andheri. And over the last 2.5 years, we've conducted 400 plus trainings, a variety of training programs, both theoretical as well as hands-on training. We have a lovely laboratory, and I would be delighted to work with the chamber in organizing hands-on trainings on analytics, both contaminants as well as micronutrients through the center. Thank you to all the office bearers of the chamber for this invitation. It's an honor to be invited on this platform to speak about this topic on labeling today. To take a step back and look at what are the regulations that are in place for food packaging in India. We have, of course, the Food Safety and Standards Packaging Regulation, very simply explained by Mache sir just now. It covers the substrate requirements of what can be used as food contact packaging material. We have additionally other requirements as well, which are mandatory for compliance for packaging of food products in India. Within FSSAI, we have 3 regulations that are applicable. One is the Food Safety and Standards Packaging Regulation of 2018. We have the Advertisement and Claims Regulation of 2018 and the Labeling and Display Regulation of 2020. In addition to the FSS regulations, the packaged food also needs to meet the packaged commodities requirement under the Legal Metrology Act. So these are the 4 primary regulations. We do have others like the plastic waste disposal, any others that may come up. But from a technical perspective, these are the 4 regulations that compliance is essential for any packaged food in India. Within the 3 FSS regulations, FSS packaging deals with the requirements of your material of construction of the packaging material. Your labeling and display defines the mandatory information that you need to share with the consumer and the manner in which that communication should happen. Machi sir just had that excellent line where he said that it is your package is a silent marketing tool for you. It is that marketing tool which reaches the consumer's house and stays there. And therefore, the authority is focused on ensuring that that consumer information is appropriate both in terms of completeness of information and in terms of there being clarity of information. So that part of mandatory information share and the manner in which that information must be shared is covered through the FSS labeling and display regulation. The advertisement and claims regulation defines when certain claims may be made, whether on the package or on the website or any other product describing material, which could be brochures, which could be advertisements, which could be information shared through various apps or web pages that you may have. Quick example, if you want to say your product contains calcium or your product has high protein, what are the conditions to be met for saying or making a statement, which is a claim that your product has a micronutrient or doesn't have a micronutrient or is low in sugar or free from fat, free from cholesterol? When can you say your product is natural? When can you say your product is pure? All those conditions for use of certain words, which are claims that the manufacturer is making about their product, are regulated and defined through the FSS advertisement and claims regulation. Legal metrology, like all other packed goods, focus is on a few of the parameters: your MRP, net weight, manner of date declaration, consumer contact information. I will, in the next 20 odd minutes that I have, be focusing on the labeling and display regulation. If there are questions that you have on advertisement and claims, I'm happy to take them during the Q&A session. But to ensure focus, I'll be looking at the labeling and display regulation. Now, when we look at this regulation, one of the most recent regulations to be notified by the authority came in December of 2020. This is the breakup of the regulation. We have 5 chapters, of which the chapter 2 is specific for labeling of prepackaged food. Chapter 3 is for food service establishments, which are the QSRs and the other establishments which serve food for immediate consumption. Chapter 4 is for labeling of non-retail containers, and Chapter 5 is a specific requirement for the labeling of food additives which are sold as such for consumers to purchase, such as food colors or flavors that may be available. Again, within these 5 chapters, we will be looking at the general requirements because those are important, and focus will remain on Chapter 2. I will briefly touch on Chapters 3, 4, and 5. The current regulation supersedes the 2011 regulation that we had on packaging and labeling. FSS packaging and labeling regulation was one of the first 4 regulations to be notified by the authority. The packaging part of it was superseded in 2018 by the packaging regulation, and since this regulation has been notified, that entire 2011 regulation has become obsolete and is replaced by these 3 regulations which we just saw. The scope of this is for both prepackaged foods and a requirement of information share with consumers for fresh foods, which is the food service establishment, has been introduced for the first time through this regulation, and that is what is met through chapter 3, which is the display part of the regulation. The labeling part is largely similar. There are certain changes which I will call out as we go through chapter 2, but the display part of the regulation is entirely new and has been introduced for the first time in this regulation. In terms of timelines of implementation, when the regulation was notified, it was notified with a timeline for compliance from 17th of November 2021, basis industry feedback that has been extended to 1st of July 2022. The display, because it was a new requirement, was initially given a date of 1st of Jan 2022. Now that date still holds, but the authority has given an advisory to the effect that they will not enforce compliance to this till 1st of July 2022. So both are notified for implementation. Both parts, labeling and display, enforcement will begin from 1st of July. So the 5 chapters are split as 11 sections, and there are 2 schedules as well to this. Now, a quick look at some of the definitions, and while I will share my presentation, I would like to call out a few of the definitions, so to say. Label is any matter that is represented on the label. It need not be printed alone. So if you have a serving suggestion which is displayed on your product label, you have a bowl of cornflakes with strawberry or with dry fruit or nuts in it, then it is construed that you are making a communication to the consumer that the inner package also contains that. So if you are making a serving suggestion in the image that you are using for your label, please ensure that there is a very clear disclaimer saying that serving suggestion only, or some such wording to ensure that there is no miscommunication to the consumer. The current regulation brings in another change, which is in the use of the best before date. So far in food, as per the 2011 regulation, a best before date was required. This regulation mandates the use of a use by or expiry date. Best before date has been made optional. Organizations may choose to have both use by date and best before date, or include only the use by or expiry date. Best before date is entirely the prerogative of the organization, no longer mandatory and no longer sufficient if it is alone included on the label. Expiry and use by has been mandated. Difference between the two, very simply, best before is a statement on the best quality. Post the BBD, it is expected that the product will continue to be safe. However, a use by or an expiry date is a statement on the safety and quality attributes, and therefore use after an expiry date is not considered acceptable from a safety perspective. Clarity also brought in on the date of manufacture and the date of packaging. Either may be used depending on the kind of product. If you are packing dry fruit or nut, you may not have a date of manufacture, you would have a date of packaging. If you are repackaging bulk, you may have both. You may have a date of manufacture and a date of packaging. The clarity in terms of what they mean has been included in the regulation. These are definitions of various kinds of packs: assorted pack, multi-unit pack, and retail pack. Important inclusion in the definition of child or children as anyone below the age of 18 years, made to harmonize with the Juvenile Justice Act. It means that wherever there is a statement on not suitable for children, it would read not suitable for children under the age of 18 years. infant, a person not more than 12 months of age. The RDA is the required or recommended dietary allowance as defined by ICMR and NIN, National Institute of Nutrition. The current version that we have is 2020. The authority has also FSSAI, that is, also has an advisory in which they have included RDAs for certain micronutrients which are not mentioned, like selenium, etc., which are not mentioned in the NIN document, have additionally also been notified by FSSAI. And when you are looking at considerations for the percentage RDA for any micronutrients that you have in your product, please do refer to both the FSSAI notification or advisory and the NIN document as well. These are some simple definitions, so I will not spend time on these. The front of pack is taking up a lot of interest right now because there has been advice from the authority that there will be inclusion of front of pack labeling requirements. But till the time that those are drafted and shared, I think it's a bit premature to comment on those. A principal display panel is that part of your package which includes all the mandatory customary information about the product which the consumer is expected to read. So that part of your panel which contains your consumer centric information, or to put it in other words, the mandatory information that is required by FSSAI, is called the principal display panel. If it is just one side of your package, then you would consider the surface area of that side. If it extends to more than one side, you would take the total surface area of the package. Why is the PDP important? The PDP is important because the size of numeral and the size of letters in the regulation are defined basis your PDP size. Lot number, code number, batch number, I think are fairly well understood. Food for catering purpose, pre-packaged foods. Right, so let's start with chapter 2, which is the labeling of pre-packaged foods. The regulation has certain general requirements. These may sound innocuous, but they do have a lot of regulatory significance, and compliance to all of these needs to be ensured. So all pre-packaged food shall be labeled. How do you define a pre-packaged food? A pre-packaged food is, I think, if you look at this definition again, a food which is placed in a package of any nature in such a manner that the contents cannot be changed without tampering with it and is ready for sale to the consumer. So if you are packaging fresh food, like pizza comes to you in a pizza box, or you have a masala dosa that is wrapped and delivered, or is a takeaway, that does not come under the purview of pre-packaged food. Pre-packaged food by definition needs to be tamper evident. So all pre-packaged food requirements of chapter 2 of the regulation are mandatory and shall be labeled. The label needs to be clear, prominent, indelible, conspicuous, unambiguous, readily legible content. Unambiguous, very important word, and we've seen numerous instances where the food industry or the food manufacturer has been asked to make changes to their label content because it may be construed differently by the consumer. The intent of the authority, and I think it's important for us to note that FSSAI comes under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and as such, it is a consumer-centric authority. It is not an industry-centric authority, and the intent of the regulation is consumer protection. Therefore, that word unambiguous is of special importance. there should be nothing on your label which is likely to mislead the consumer. So your misleading advertisements or misleading label content are not permissible under this general requirement of the regulation. Hidden amongst the entire regulation, but has a great significance, so calling it out for that purpose. It needs that the label is at least having one of the two languages, English or Hindi in the Devanagari script. In addition to Hindi or English, you may have other languages as well, as long as there is no contradiction in the content of the two languages that are on your label. If your package is provided with an outside container or wrapper such that the container or wrapper is displayed for retail sale, then the outer wrapper shall contain all the declarations which are required to appear on the package. Unless, of course, that the wrapper is itself transparent. Which means to say that the face of the label which is visible to the consumer becomes your primary label and must contain all the information that is mandated through chapter 2 of this regulation. You cannot do stickering, so label on pre-packaged foods should not separate from the container. Stickering is permissible only for certain requirements of imported foods. For domestic sale of foods, stickering is not permitted. Obviously, no false, misleading, deceptive, or erroneous impressions. Any pictorial information which is there should not be in conflict with what is inside the package. Requirements for e-commerce, including direct sale, where all the information that is on the label should be available for the consumer at the time that they are making a choice to purchase. So if I am buying from an e-commerce platform, I should have access to all the mandatory label information. The only allowance in this is that the actual date coding, the batch number, date of manufacture, and expiry date need not be mentioned on the e-commerce platform, but all other information that we will see in the subsequent slides is mandatory for display on e-commerce platforms at the time that the consumer is making a choice to sell. So this is an overview slide which has all the requirements under this regulation. We'll look at each of these in some degree of detail. Okay, this is a sample which includes all of these requirements. The product name, instructions for use, net quantity, FSSAI's logo, license number, expiry date now, no longer best before date, MRP, batch number, date of manufacture, veg, non-veg logo, nutrition information, what needs to be included we will see in the subsequent slides, list of ingredients, allergen declaration, and name and complete address of the customer care number. So when you look at labeling requirements, and please forgive the use of the brand specific image, but merely from an educational purpose, wanted to share what we mean by the name of the food. When you look at this product, what is the name of the food? The name of the food is not masala Maggi, it is not spicy Maggi, it is not yummy Maggi. The name of the food needs to indicate the true nature of the food contained in the pack on the front of the pack. That is what the regulation requires. And here the requirement is that when you have a standard food, that is subpart A, where a food is specified by a certain essential composition under FSSR. In simple words, if your food is under standard category, then you must use the name that is used in the Food Product Standards and Additives Regulation. So if you have low-fat chocolate as the standardized food in the regulation, and your product complies with that regulation, then the word low-fat chocolate must appear as the name of the food in the front of the pack in addition to any other fanciful names that you may choose to use, as long as they are compliant with the advertisement and claims regulation. If your product is a non-standard food, if it is a proprietary food or a novel food, you need to use a name which is well understood by the consumer. So a common or usual name or an accompanying description which gives the true nature of the food, such as the use of the words 2-minute noodles. Right? So this regulation brings in a lot of clarity and clearly defines what is the expectation from the name of the food. In case your food falls under standard category, then please use the title of that subcategory of food that you are complying with. In case your food is non-standard, then the best description understood by the consumer may be used as long as it reflects or describes the true nature of the food. Any additional information that you may have, you may want to use descriptors for your food on the front of pack, that is permissible as long as compliance is verified to the claims regulation. List of ingredients is required except for single ingredient foods. The manner of declaration should be a title which says list of ingredients or contents or ingredients. The manner of declaration of ingredients shall be in the descending order of their composition by weight or volume at the time of manufacture. A food additive which is added needs to be mentioned by its purpose and the INS number. Both need to be included. There are certain classes which have been defined by the regulation. If your ingredients you use or fall under any of these classes, then you may use that class title. For example, if you are adding an oil, you need to write, or you can write edible vegetable oil in bracket soybean or edible groundnut oil. The name of the oil needs to be mentioned. The class title may also be used. Okay, so these are some of the classes that are there. If you have a compound ingredient, which is like a spice mix, which is itself a mix of several components, and that compound ingredient contributes to more than 5% mass by mass of your product, then the entire composition of that compound ingredient needs to be mentioned on the label. If the compound ingredient contributes less than 5%, you need not give the constituent components of that ingredient. However, if there is any additive that is included, then that additive definitely needs to be mentioned. Declaration of added water not needed if it is evaporated during manufacturing. Not needed if you are showing it as a brine, broth, syrup, as a compound food. If your product is dehydrated or condensed and is meant to be reconstituted prior to consumption, then the ingredients shall be mentioned in descending order of weight, including a statement which says ingredients of the product when prepared in accordance with the directions of the label.
Shubha, sorry to interrupt you. I think it's going quite well, but shortage of time. I'll request you to speed up.
Sure. How much time do I have, sir? I will accordingly.
You have exhausted your time, but you can take another 5 minutes looking at the importance of the subject.
All right, sure. Yeah. So I will wrap up in 5 minutes. Continuing on the list of ingredients, the describing component, if you say you have a chocolate biscuit or a chicken sausage, whichever is the defining ingredient, the percentage of use of that defining ingredient needs to be mentioned on the label. There are certain exclusions where ingredient declarations are not required. I will leave that for you to read when you receive a copy of my presentation. I will jump directly to the nutritional information. Definitions of various macro and micronutrients have been included. A quick call out here is that no longer is the word sugar used in the regulation. It is sugars and includes all mono and disaccharides. So added sugars, low sugars, the word sugar is not part of our regulatory framework anymore from a labeling perspective. There has been an additional inclusion where the nutritional information needs to be given per 100 grams or per 100 ml. And the RDA to be mentioned as a percentage RDA per serve. So in addition, so earlier labeling requirement required just per 100 gram nutrient declaration. Now a percentage of RDA per serve needs to be computed as per the NIN ICMR 2020 and for certain macro and micronutrients, they have also been redefined through the regulation. These are the RDA requirements that have been initiated. Again, exemptions to labeling for nutritional information exist. I will leave them for you to read. Descriptions of what is gluten-free, less than 25 ppm gluten, description of trans fat, if you want to say free, all of these are included. An allowance is given of a minus 10% of the labeled declared nutrient value. There is no plus definition of how much overage you may add. If you are claiming 15% of RDA for a particular micronutrient, there you would of course be adding overages to ensure that that is available through the shelf life. There is no definition of how much that overage may be in standard foods and proprietary foods. However, it is important to remember that for food, we are always limited by 1 RDA. We cannot have more than 1 RDA under a food that would go into a drug category. Your energy computations, again, I will skip those. The other major change is the change in the non-veg logo to a brown triangle with a brown within a brown square. Rationale for this is that even those who are colorblind would be able to look at the label and identify whether the product is vegetarian or non-vegetarian. The sizes that we need as per the PDP. Declaration of food additives as per the INS numbering system is required. Declaration of name and complete address, where there has been a certain allowance given. You may have a different brand owner and different manufacturing locations. The authority has permitted use of barcodes for issue, including the license number of one of these, depending on the kind of license you hold. These are the size and letters of numeral which are now harmonized with the LM. We'll look at date marking. We've already spoken about the need for the expiry and use by date. Again, exceptions where it is not required exist for date marking in case of meals in airlines, railways, mobile catering. Not only is the use by date needed, date of manufacturing needed, but also the time at which it was packaged or made is to be included. Labeling for imported food remains the same. There is, as I said, an allowance for stickering for some of the information. Instructions for use required, yes. Food allergen declaration. This is a new requirement that has come in. Allows you to mention in short 8 allergens that are identified. If your product is likely to be cross-contaminated with an allergen because your line is also handling them, then a statement to the fact saying that may contain whichever is the other cross-contaminant needs to be included. For foods not for human consumption, such as ghee or oil for lighting lamps, puja water, the black cross in a black square has been mandated. Principal display panel we discussed. Mandatory declarations, there's a Schedule 1. I'll quickly take you through that. Exemptions depending on the shelf life and on the size of the packets. If less than 7 days, you don't need a date of manufacture. You just need to put use by date. I'll not spend time on the catering requirements. Just quickly show you Schedule 1. I'm not spending time on these parts of it. Schedule 1 is for the use of the +F logo. There are certain products which have defined fortification standards under the fortification regulation. If your product falls under those standards, then you may use the +F logo. You need to apply for it through your FOSCOS portal using your license numbers, and the manner of use is defined in this regulation. Same for the organic Jaivik Bharat logo. Now, depending upon certain ingredients and certain types of products, there are additional requirements. If your product has more than 10% of polyol, for example, you need to have a declaration that polyols may have a laxative effect. If you are adding an artificial sweetener, you need to have a declaration saying contains so-and-so artificial sweetener, not suitable for children below the age of 18 years. If you have a dairy product, not all dairy, milk and milk analogs, you are required to add the dairy logo that has been defined by the authority, the blue drop. So certain additional requirements, all of them are in the regulation. And yeah, so that's about it. I think I will, again, as I said, depending on both the ingredients and the type of product, there are additional requirements which the regulation specifies. There is a penalty for the non-compliance as defined by the Act. Misbranded food is up to 3 lakhs, misleading advertisement up to 10 lakhs, so on and so forth. Right. So yes, I think I'll close with that and then we can take any question answers.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think I feel bad and guilty, for
Oh,
both
no,
the
sir.
speakers actually. These topics require much more time than just half an hour. Quite interesting and useful to the participants, but I think individually they require minimum of 1 hour. That's my feel actually. We will do that after, the June 22nd when the new regulations come. I think we can still do that and you will be available. I didn't see any questions except somebody saying we could have a one-day event or something like that. No specific questions. Somebody is requesting if the presentation can be shared. That's something which has come. Pushpalata, yeah, has raised a hand. You can go ahead, Pushpalata, with the question.
Good evening, all. See, I'm a manufacturer of bakery products. Where in bread we use improver, if my quantity is around 0.2% to 0.3%, where that improver contains INS 1100, whereas directly I'm not using that to my product. Is this mandatory to mention that INS 1100 on the packet, or it is not required?
It is required, madam. Even if your additive is coming in as a carryover, you need to mention it on your label. Yes.
Okay, madam. Thank you.
Vijay, you can go ahead with your question. Vijay?
Hello. Sir, good evening, sir. Good evening, madam.
Yes, yeah.
Myself Srikanth from Sri Bhagyalakshmi Agro Foods Private Limited. I have a couple of questions. The question number 1 is whether the net quantity can be left blank on the front and back of panel.
I don't understand. So you are asking whether it can be online printed? Is that the question?
Yes. Depending upon the grammage changes, we can print it like that. Is it okay?
It is okay from a regulatory perspective, but operationally may be challenging because the size of the net content is often larger than the remaining online printing that we do. If you are able to work it and your printer has that capacity, remember that there are requirements in terms of spacing as well. So to the left and right, you need to have double the space as per the size. So if you have a 2 mm height, 4 mm to the left and 4 mm to the right needs to be maintained free, and 2 mm top and bottom. If you are able to meet that with an online printing, regulation has no issue at all. Operationally, if you are able to do it.
Okay, madam. Thank you. The question is, manufactured by is mandatory on the pack, on the back of pack.
Yes.
Because some of the products we have a contract manufacture.
Their address as well as license number are mandatory for inclusion.
Because we have to put both manufactured by and packed and distributed
Brand
by,
owner.
packed and
Yes.
marketed by.
Yes. Yes.
If it is a contract manufacturer also, we have to put both.
Yes.
Both. The
Correct.
manufactured by address is that party address. Ours is packed and distributed by. Am I correct?
Absolutely correct, sir.
Thank
Both
you,
the
thank you.
license numbers need to come. The
Yeah.
FSSAI logo will be against your name, need not be repeated multiple times.
Okay.
Only
And
the
then about
logo.
yeah, recycle logo, because
Yes.
some companies they are depicting 7, 5 like that. Can you
Yes.
please elaborate on that, please?
I think question for Mache sir rather than for me. He will be able to. It depends on the kind of packaging material. Best it left to the expert to speak on that.
Okay,
Dr. Mahesh? Yeah.
Yeah. So this, when you are talking of the recycling logo, actually this logo is for not only for the plastic, but it is for other materials also. Basically, it is depending upon what material you have. If it is a PET, the recycling logo is one. So HDP, if you, depending upon what material you're using, the recycling logo has to be put. That is a mandatory, but it is not mandatory if the size is very small. So any sort of a laminate or any complex material, it is 7 and 7. So generally it is done that way, to just to identify so that it is easy for the recycling.
Madam, sir, it is mandatory. It is mandatory to display on the pack.
Yes, it is mandatory. But
Because
smaller size, it is not mandatory. A particular size and above, it is mandatory.
Okay, but some companies they have shown that on the back of pack, but some companies they have not followed that. So for that only I asked the question.
No, size may be smaller. Smaller size, it is not mandatory.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
sir.
you. I think we will take one last question, and then probably there was one question which said, no, there are many people who use these stickers. They buy empty packages and then stick the stickers. Is that acceptable? That is something. There's a question like that actually.
Sir, one label which contains all the mandatory information can be affixed. That is not stickering. Stickering is where, from a regulatory perspective, stickering is where some information is modified by application of an additional label, or some information is added. So it has to be one composite PDP.
Yeah.
That's the requirement.
Okay, thank you. Nakshatri, are you online?
Yes.
I think Nakshatri?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, you can go ahead with the vote of thanks. There'll be other questions, but I think paucity of time, I think you can go ahead with vote of thanks.
Okay. I think it was an excellent session. Food is so important. Packaging is also important, and the labeling is also important. For the consumer's point and the manufacturer point, I think Dr. Rajesh Mache and also Ms. Subha has presented very well. I thank so much on behalf of the Agri Food Processing Committee to both of them for giving in a short span of time and with a limited hours, and they explained very well. I think all of us, we enjoyed that. I think the more and more changes happening in the food packaging and labeling, I think there's a more required the information to be shared and information to be implemented. Thanks a lot to Dr. Mache and Dr. Shubha. Thanks a lot to Mr. Ankur Bhumikji for getting the contest. Thanks a lot. Prakash ji, I think wonderful as usual. You are the man behind this entire seminar and webinar. Thank you so much for presenting and moderating. Thanks to all the participants who have taken their time and making this webinar successful. Thanks to Rupa and BCIC. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Prakash sir, Nakshatri sir, and Bomik sir, and Vijay sir. Thank you very much for nice input.
Rupa, do
Thank
we
you,
word
Lord.
the national anthem?
Rupa, please.
Yes, sir. We would like to present a small thanking video,
Okay.
sir. Post
Yeah,
that
sure.
one,
Go ahead.
Yeah, please.
we will
Yeah,
play
sure.
the national anthems.
Yeah, sure.
Please,
Go ahead.
please.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे जय भारत जननी
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ankur ji. Thank you, Prakash ji. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Dr. Mache and Shubha. I think the
Thank you,
physical
sir.
souvenir will reach both of you to your offices. Actually, this was a virtual from
Thank you, sir.
BCIC.
Honored to be here.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think it's a wonderful session. It's a wonderful session. I think probably we need to have a repeat session also.
Yeah, exactly. But with more time, actually.
Yes, with a longer time.
Each one probably requires. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
I think each one probably we will have one more. This is something very knowledgeable. I think great session here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very
Ankurji.
much, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you all, sir.